My closest friend insisted I show up in basic clothes for the ball selection. She completely lost it when the most attractive guy picked me as his date. Every year, students from the Marine Academy came to our campus to choose dates for their formal ball. It was a long-standing tradition where they marched through the main courtyard in full dress uniforms and formally invited someone to attend with them. My best friend Alexis had been fixated on this since our freshman year. She spent 3 years planning her outfit, deciding exactly where she'd stand in the courtyard, and even rehearsing her surprised expression in the mirror. She was sure several Marines would ask her, and that she'd casually choose the best-looking one. When senior year finally arrived, she made me wake up at 5 a.m. to do her hair and makeup. She wore a red dress she bought just for that day, and had spent $200 on it. She told me to wear my usual jeans and a simple shirt because she didn't want us competing for attention. Besides, she said, Marines never pick girls like me anyway. She flat out said I was the supportive friend type, not the chosen type, and that I should be content with that role. We stood in the courtyard with around 200 other girls, and Alexis positioned us right in the middle so everyone would see her. When the Marines entered, the crowd fell silent. There were about 30 of them in formal uniforms, led by a guy who looked straight out of a movie. 6 feet 3 inches, flawless posture, and green eyes you could spot from across the courtyard. Alexis grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises and whispered that he was hers. She started posing and flipping her hair, making sure he noticed her. He walked directly toward us, and Alexis stepped forward with her practiced surprised look, but he walked right past her and stopped in front of me. He introduced himself as Colin and asked if I'd do him the honor of being his date to the Marine Ball. Alexis actually gasped out loud and tried to step between us, saying there had to be some mistake. Colin politely moved around her and kept his eyes on me, waiting for my answer. When I said yes, he smiled and handed me a formal invitation with his contact information. Alexis stood there frozen as other Marines selected their dates all around us. Not a single one came up to her. For the rest of the day, Alexis refused to speak to me. When we got back to our apartment, she finally exploded. She claimed I must have done something to deceive him, maybe talked to him beforehand somehow. She accused me of secretly preparing for this and pretending not to care so she wouldn't notice. She said I knew how important this was to her and that I intentionally took her moment. She actually used the word stole, like Colin was something she owned. She demanded that I text Colin and tell him I couldn't go, that I was sick or had a boyfriend or anything to back out of it. When I turned her down, she told me I was the worst friend alive and that plain girls like me never deserved men like Colin. She said he must have felt pity for me or lost some stupid bet and was forced to ask out the ugliest girl he could find. She spent the next 2 days refusing to speak to me while messaging everyone we knew that I had betrayed her. She told people I'd been planning this for months and had intentionally ruined her chances. Then she crossed the line. She texted Colin from my phone while I was in the shower. She told him I'd changed my mind and didn't want to go with him, that I'd only agreed to be nice, but that I wasn't into military guys. She erased the messages so I wouldn't find them. When Colin didn't text me for 3 days, I assumed he backed out until his roommate messaged, asking why I'd been so harsh in rejecting him. That's when I learned what Alexis had done. I reached out to Colin right away and explained everything. He was relieved because he'd actually been really excited to take me. He said he noticed me volunteering at the Campus Veteran Center and thought I was beautiful and kind. He'd come to our university specifically hoping to ask me. We set plans for the ball, and I didn't tell Alexis I'd fixed it. Instead, I told her she was right, and Colin hadn't contacted me again, so I probably wouldn't go. She instantly brightened up and started acting like my friend again, saying she knew he never really wanted me. The night of the Marine Ball, Alexis was in our apartment watching movies and eating ice cream, fully convinced I was also home sulking in my room. I was actually at the ball in a stunning navy dress my sister had loaned me, dancing with Colin, who turned out to be funny, smart, and genuinely into me. I got back to the apartment around 10 in the morning, still feeling like I was floating from the night before. The ball had been perfect. Colin had been perfect. Dancing with him, talking with him, laughing at his dumb jokes about marine life. My feet ached from the heels my sister lent me with the dress, and I had glitter from the decorations tangled in my hair, but I didn't care. I opened a door as quietly as I could and saw Alexis, exactly where I'd left her the night before. She was on the couch in her pajamas with a blanket, watching some rom-com and eating straight from a pint of ice cream. The apartment smelled like the popcorn she'd made, and tissues were scattered across the coffee table like she'd been crying through movies all night. My stomach tightened with guilt, even though I knew what she'd done to me was worse. She looked up when I walked in. "How was your moping evening?" She said it in that fake sympathetic tone that made my skin crawl. I gripped my small purse behind my back so she couldn't see it. The purse held my phone, and the formal invite Colin handed me at the ball, his number written neatly on the back. "It was okay," I said, going straight to my room. "I just watched something on my laptop. I knew you'd move on from him sooner or later." She turned back to her movie. Guys like that never really choose girls like us anyway. They only do the formal asking because that's tradition. I shut my door and rested against it, my heart racing. The navy dress was still in my car where I'd stashed it that morning. I changed back into normal clothes in the parking lot before coming upstairs. I sat on my bed and checked my phone. Colin had already texted twice asking if I got home safe and saying he'd had an amazing time. I smiled and replied, then slid the phone under my pillow when I heard Alexis moving around the living room. The next few days felt off. I was texting Colin nonstop, but hiding it like it was something illegal. He wanted to see me again, to take me to dinner or just hang out on campus. But I kept making excuses. Every time I imagined running into someone who might mention the ball to Alexis, my stomach twisted. We finally agreed to meet for coffee at a place 2 miles off campus that students never went to. It was mostly older people and office workers on lunch break. I arrived first and took the back corner booth, where no one could spot me from the windows. Colin showed up 10 minutes later in jeans and a regular shirt instead of his uniform. He looked different but still good. He slid into the booth across from me and smiled, then reached across the table to take my hand. I pulled it back and glanced around to be sure no one from school was there. Sorry, I said. I'm just being careful. He ordered coffee, and we talked for a bit about nothing important. He told me about his academy classes, and I told him about my upcoming biology exam. Then, he went quiet and looked at me seriously. Can I ask you something? He stirred sugar into his coffee. Why are we meeting 2 miles off campus? Like we're having an affair. You know I want to take you out for real. Like actual dates where we don't have to hide. I explained everything. The whole story about Alexis sabotaging me by texting from my phone. How I fixed it without telling her. How I let her think he ghosted me, so she wouldn't freak out. I told him about lying to her about not going to the ball, and how she still believed I spent that night alone in my room. Colin listened without interrupting, his coffee going cold in front of him. That's really messed up, he said when I finished. What she did with your phone. That's not how friends behave. I know. I lifted my napkin, but if I tell her now that I went to the ball, and that we're seeing each other, she'll freak out. She'll make my life miserable. We live together, and share the same circle of friends. Colin went quiet for a moment. So you're going to keep lying to her? For how long? I don't know. Until I figure things out. He reached across the table again, and this time I let him hold my hand. I understand. Toxic friendships are tough. I had a guy at the academy like that. Always trying to one-up me. Always making me feel small. But here's the thing. You're letting Alexis run your life, even though she doesn't realize it. You're hiding and sneaking around, and that's not fair to you. Or to me, honestly. That hit me harder than I expected. He was right. I was still letting Alexis decide what I could and couldn't do. Just like I had for 3 years. I only nodded and stared into my coffee. A week after the ball, Colin texted me saying his sister was coming to campus for the day. Her name was Margot, and she was 2 years older than him. She worked as a teacher in the next state over. He really wanted me to meet her, and suggested lunch at the student union. I almost said no, because the student union was right in the center of campus where everyone ate. But something in the way he asked made me say yes. I met them at noon. Margot had the same green eyes as Colin but darker hair, and she hugged me like we'd known each other forever. We grabbed food from the cafeteria line and sat at a table by the windows. I kept glancing around nervously, expecting to see Alexis or one of our mutual friends. Colin says you two had a great time at the ball, Margot said, taking a bite of her sandwich. He wouldn't stop talking about you for weeks before it. Really? I looked at Colin, and he shrugged with an embarrassed smile. I told her about volunteering at the Veteran Center. He'd noticed me there months earlier, apparently. Margot listened and asked questions about my major and my plans after graduation. She was easy to talk to. The kind of person who made you feel at ease right away. Then she noticed me checking the entrance again. You okay? You seem tense. I laid out the Alexis situation. Everything from the start up to now. Margot's face shifted while I spoke, moving from curious to worried to nearly angry. Let me get this straight. This girl pressured you to tone yourself down, so you wouldn't outshine her. Then, when a guy picked you anyway, she undermined you, and has spent years convincing you you're not enough. And you're still shielding her feelings? When she framed it like that, it sounded ridiculous. I know it's complicated. It's not complicated. Margot set her fork down. Real friends don't spend years making you feel small. They don't manipulate you or break you down. And honestly, sometimes the trash takes itself out. You just have to let it go. Colin nodded along. I sat there feeling like they'd both said something obvious I'd been refusing to see. We wrapped up lunch and walked out together, and that's when I ran into Dominic from my dorm building. He was with his girlfriend Sarah, both heading into the union as we were leaving. Hey, Dominic grinned when he saw me. You looked amazing at the ball the other night. I didn't know you and Colin were together. My stomach dropped. I could feel Colin and Margot both watching me, waiting to see what I'd say. Sarah nodded excitedly and said something about how cute we looked dancing together. Thanks. I managed. Can you maybe not mention it to anyone though? It's kind of private. Dominic looked puzzled. Why would it be private? Everyone thought you guys looked great together. Half the people there were talking about it. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't bring it up. Please. He shrugged. Okay, sure. Whatever you want. But it's not a secret. Like people were posting pictures and everything. They walked into the union, and I stood there feeling sick. Colin touched my arm softly. "It's going to come out eventually," he said. "You know that, right?" I knew. I just wasn't ready for it yet. 2 days later, I was sitting in my biology lecture trying to focus on cellular respiration when my phone started buzzing in my bag. I ignored it at first, but it kept going. Buzz after buzz after buzz. I slid it out beneath my desk and counted 12 messages from Alexis. My hands began to tremble as I opened them. The first simply read, "What the fuck?" The second was a screenshot of an Instagram post from someone who was at the ball. It showed a group photo, and I was clearly visible in the background wearing my navy dress. Colin's arm was around my waist. We were both smiling. The photo was tagged with both of our names. The next 10 messages grew more and more furious. She demanded to know why I lied. She called me a snake. Said she couldn't believe I would betray her like this. The final one only said we needed to talk immediately. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the class. The professor's voice faded into background noise as I stared at my phone, watching the messages keep stacking up. By the time class ended, there were 20 texts. I walked back to the apartment slowly, taking the longer route, fully aware of what was waiting for me. Alexis was standing in the living room with her arms crossed when I opened the door. Her face was flushed, and her eyes looked unhinged. "Why did you lie to me?" She didn't even say hello. "You went to the ball. You went with Colin. And you let me believe you stayed home feeling bad for yourself." I tried to explain. I told her about discovering she texted him from my phone, about fixing things with him, about being afraid of how she'd react. But she talked over me before I could finish 3 sentences. "You deliberately humiliated me. You went behind my back and made me look stupid to everyone who knew the real story. Do you know how many people must have seen you there and then listened to me talk about how Colin didn't want you? You're the one who texted him from my phone." My voice rose. "You sabotaged me first, because you stole my moment." She was shouting now. "You knew how much that ball meant to me. You knew I'd been planning it for 3 years. And you just took it." "I didn't take anything. Colin chose me. That's not something you can steal." The argument dragged on for 20 minutes. She kept insisting I'd been plotting against her from the start, that I must have contacted Colin ahead of time to set the whole thing up. She called me a snake and a fake friend. She said I'd been pretending to support her while stabbing her in the back. I tried to keep my cool, but eventually I snapped. "You ruined things first." I said it again. "You messaged Colin using my phone and told him I didn't want to go. You erased the text so I'd never find out. And for 3 years you've chipped away at my confidence by labeling me the supportive friend type and acting like I should be thankful you even spend time with me." Alexis went completely quiet. For around 10 seconds, she just looked at me. Then her face shifted into something icy. "You're delusional if you think Colin actually likes you. He probably felt sorry for the sad girl in plain clothes. Or maybe it was a dare. Pick the ugliest girl you can find. That's probably what happened." Something inside me cracked, but not in the way it usually did when she said things like that. This time, instead of pain, I felt clarity. I could see the pattern so clearly. Years of small remarks meant to keep me small. Years of framing herself as the pretty one, the chosen one, while I was expected to accept being the backup friend. "I'm done," I said. "I'm done letting you tear me down. I'm done pretending this is a healthy friendship. You don't treat people you care about like this." She laughed. "You'll come crawling back. You always do. Because without me, you're nobody." I walked to my room and shut the door. I could hear her moving around the living room, slamming things. Then my phone started buzzing again. I checked it and saw she was posting on social media. I opened Instagram, and there it was. A long, detailed thread about how I betrayed her by secretly going to the ball after she'd been so gracious about Colin choosing me. She made it seem like she'd been completely supportive, and I'd gone behind her back for no reason. She carefully removed the part where she sabotaged me, made herself look like the victim of my cruel deception. My phone blew up with messages. Mutual friends asking what happened. People picking sides. Some believed her story. Some asked for mine. I sat on my bed watching the notifications stack up and realized she was forcing my hand. I could either defend myself publicly or let everyone believe I was the villain in her carefully crafted story. I sat on my bed staring at my phone until 3 in the morning. The alerts kept rolling in non-stop, and every time I thought they were done, another surge hit. I pulled up a blank post and began typing. My hands were unsteady as I searched for wording that explained everything without coming off mean or defensive. I erased whole sections and rewrote them again and again. I wanted people to see what truly happened, but I didn't want to publicly ruin Alexis, even after she tried to ruin me. Around 4 in the morning, I finally had something that felt real. I laid out how she'd messaged Colin from my phone while I was in the shower, then wiped the chat. I added screenshots showing the message she sent while pretending to be me, plus the timestamp proving I was showering when it went out. I described how she'd spent 3 years telling me I was the supportive friend type and never the chosen type. I stuck to the facts and did my best not to sound like I was attacking her. I reread it 12 times before finally posting at 5 a.m. Then I shut my phone off and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't slow down. When I woke up 3 hours later, my phone was flooded with reactions. Some people were stunned by the text sabotage. and said they couldn't believe Alexis would do that. Others said I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball, and that deceiving her made me just as wrong. A few mutual friends said we were both overreacting about a guy and needed to grow up. One girl I barely knew wrote a long comment saying the whole situation was toxic and that we both needed therapy. Reading it all made me feel sick because no matter what I said, someone was always going to see me as the villain. Around 2 that afternoon, my phone rang and Colin's name popped up. I almost let it go to voicemail because I was embarrassed that everything was so public. He asked if I was okay, and his voice sounded angry but not at me. He said he'd seen everything online and couldn't believe Alexis had sabotaged me like that. He asked why I'd never told him about all the other things she'd said over the years about me being the supportive friend type. I told him I'd heard it for so long that I stopped recognizing it as an insult. Colin went quiet for a bit, then told me about a former best friend from high school who competed with him over everything. Grades, sports, girls, even dumb things like who could do more push-ups. He said it took him 2 years after graduation to realize that real friends don't make you feel like you're always losing some invisible contest. We talked for over an hour about toxic friendships and why people stay in them. He said something that stuck with me, that sometimes we accept treatment from friends we never accept from a stranger because we confuse history with loyalty. After that call, I felt less alone because someone finally understood why the situation was so complicated. That night, there was a knock at my bedroom door. I opened it thinking it would be Alexis, but instead it was Liliana Gonzalez standing there. She lived right next door, and while we'd always been cordial, we were never especially close. She asked if she could come inside, and I stepped aside to let her in. She settled into my desk chair and said she was relieved I'd finally stood up to Alexis. I must have looked shocked because she laughed and explained she'd been observing our dynamic for 3 years. She told me Alexis had treated me poorly and that she'd wanted to speak up before but didn't want to stir up drama. She said she'd noticed how Alexis always cast herself as the pretty one and made quiet remarks that chipped away at my confidence. She even offered to be a witness if I decided to talk to housing about the hostile living situation. I thanked her and felt genuinely grateful, since I usually kept to myself and hadn't realized anyone else saw what was going on. She hugged me before leaving and said real friends lift you up instead of tearing you down. The following week was draining. Our shared friend group basically split down the middle. Some people fully sided with Alexis and stopped acknowledging me in the dining hall. Others felt her text message sabotage was worse than my deception and deliberately chose to sit with me instead of her. Most people just seemed worn out by the whole mess and avoided both of us. I lost a few friends I'd had since freshman year who believed Alexis' version that I'd been scheming against her all along. But I also grew closer to people like Liliana and Dominic, who told me they'd always sensed something was wrong with how Alexis treated me. Dominic pulled me aside one afternoon and said he'd watched Alexis manipulate situations for years and felt relieved that I'd finally seen through it. The social fallout felt like middle school drama, but it was real, and losing people I considered friends genuinely hurt. Living in the same apartment as Alexis became unbearable. We hardly spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. She'd make pointed remarks about fake friends whenever I walked through the living room. She'd crank up the TV volume when I was trying to study. She'd leave her dishes piled in the sink for days. Knowing it bothered me, I started spending most of my time at the library or at Colin's place just to avoid being home. I went to the housing coordinator's office and explained everything. The coordinator was understanding and said I could request a room change for the spring semester, but nothing was available until then. She told me I was stuck in the hostile environment for another 6 weeks. I marked off the days on my calendar and tried to stay out of the apartment as much as I could. Colin invited me to a Marine Academy event 3 weeks after everything blew up. I was anxious about meeting more of his friends, worried they might have heard about the drama. But when we arrived, everyone was friendly and treated me like I truly belonged. Colin brought me over to meet Declan Knight, one of his closest academy buddies. Declan's date was warm and mentioned that Colin had been talking about me for weeks before the ball picks. She said he'd been mapping out how to ask me and stressing that I might turn him down. I glanced at Colin and he grinned, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. Being with people who knew nothing about the Alexis mess and only saw me as Colin's girlfriend felt unbelievably refreshing. No one was judging or choosing sides. They simply welcomed me into the group. Declan's date also said Colin had told everyone I volunteered at the Veteran Center, and that's what first drew him in. Hearing that made Alexis's claims that he only felt sorry for me sound even more absurd. One morning, I was making coffee in the apartment kitchen when Alexis came in. We'd been dodging each other for 3 weeks, and the sudden closeness made me tense. She paused, then said we needed to talk like adults. I carefully agreed and turned toward her. She said she'd been thinking about everything and was sorry for texting Colin from my phone. My hope lifted for a moment until she immediately added that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball. She said we both messed up, but mine was worse because I intentionally deceived her. I realized this was the closest she could get to an apology, one that still left part of the blame on me. She couldn't just say sorry without conditions or shared fault. I took a deep breath and told her I appreciated the partial apology, but I couldn't return to friendship where she needed me less confident so she could feel better about herself. I said her years of subtle digs about me being the supportive friend type had really hurt me, even if she hadn't meant them that way. She looked honestly shocked, like she had no idea what I meant. She said she was just being honest about our different social roles, and that some people are naturally more outgoing and attractive, while others fit supporting roles better. She said I was being too sensitive and reading too much into normal friend comments. That confirmed everything I needed to know. She truly didn't understand how her words affected me, and likely never would. We agreed to be civil roommates for the remaining weeks of the semester. No more pointed remarks about fake friends. No more social media drama or public fights. Just polite coexistence until housing changes in January. It wasn't friendship, and it wasn't the closure some people expected, but it was livable. I felt relieved to have clear boundaries, even if they weren't the reconciliation everyone thought we should have. Some mutual friends seemed let down that we didn't hug it out, but I was done pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Finals week came and went. I received approval to switch rooms to a single for the spring term. I boxed up my things the day after my final exam and took everything to my parents' place for winter break. My sister picked me up, and during the drive home she asked how I was holding up. I told her everything that had happened since the ball. She stayed quiet for a bit, and then said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said seeing me accept Alexis' behavior for 3 years had been difficult, but she knew I needed to reach that point on my own. My parents were supportive when I got home, even though they had always liked Alexis, and seemed sad the friendship was over. My mom said that sometimes friendships simply run their course, and that's okay. My dad asked if I was sure I'd tried everything to repair it. I explained that you can't fix a friendship where one person needs the other to stay small. They both hugged me and said they understood. Having their support felt validating, even though the situation was complicated and messy. Winter break arrived with the calm relief of distance and space. Colin and I began doing video calls every few days, and those talks felt different from any friendship I'd had before. He'd ask about my day, and actually listen to my answers without steering the conversation back to himself. When I mentioned feeling nervous about a family dinner, he didn't say I was overreacting or that other people had it worse. He simply said my feelings made sense and asked so it helped me feel better. I noticed how different this felt from years of Alexis brushing off my concerns or turning them into chances to talk about her own issues. One night we were on a call, and I mentioned missing the campus veteran center where we'd first crossed paths, and Colin smiled and said he'd been hoping I'd bring that up. He told me he'd visited 3 times before the ball selection, always timing it, so he could watch me interact with the older vets, and that he'd been working up the nerve to introduce himself for weeks. Hearing that made something shift in my chest because Alexis had spent years convincing me that guys like Colin didn't notice girls like me unless they felt sorry for us. But Colin had noticed me because of my character and kindness, not despite some imagined flaw. We made plans for spring semester, including study dates at the library and weekend trips to nearby hiking trails, and I realized I was building something real with someone who truly wanted me to succeed and feel confident. My sister came into my room one afternoon and caught me smiling at my phone during a text exchange with Colin, and she sat on my bed and said she was glad I finally found someone who treated me the way I deserved. That validation from her meant everything, because she'd watched the Alexis friendship damage my self-worth for 3 years. Spring semester started with me moving into my single room in a different building, and the freedom of that space felt incredible. I was able to decorate any way I liked without stressing over Alexis's opinions. I was able to study without her sharp remarks about how some people supposedly had to put in more effort than others. I was able to simply exist without constantly checking whether I was acting too confident or too successful or too much of anything. 3 weeks into the semester, I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall when I noticed Alexis sitting at a table across the room with a few girls from her communications class. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and we both nodded politely before turning away. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tears or apologies or attempts to reopen everything that had happened. Just 2 people who once shared everything and now shared nothing. I sat with Liliana and Declan, who had become real friends over the past few months. People who celebrated my successes instead of looking for ways to minimize them. Colin joined us a few minutes later and kissed my cheek before sitting down, and I noticed Alexis watching from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite figure out. I turned back to my friends and focused on the conversation at my table instead of worrying about what she thought. Sometimes I felt sad about losing what I believed Alexis, but most of the time, I felt relieved to be free from the constant feeling that I was never enough.